The Autopsy. This is the third episode from the anthology horror series Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. It's an adaptation of the short story by Michael Shea. I'm not going to comment on the anthology as a whole. In this video, I'll just talk about the Autopsy, because this is one of my favorite horror short stories. I love it. So you can imagine how excited I was when I found out there was a Netflix adaptation and del Toro was involved in some capacity. I have the original short story in my possession here, inside this anthology collection titled The Weird. You should definitely check out this book. It's packed with some of the best examples of weird fiction stories. The Autopsy is about the aftermath of a police investigation on a series of missing person cases and gruesome murders. Dr. Carl Winters, an elderly pathologist, receives a call from his friend Sheriff Nathan Craven. The sheriff called him because his search for the killer culminated in a mining incident that caused the deaths of 10 men, or as he said,
9 men, and one inhuman son of a bitch.
One of the deceased, Joe Allen, is the cannibalistic serial killer behind the disappearances. The sheriff asks Dr. Winters to perform autopsies on the workers to ensure their families receive payouts from the insurance company. The episode begins with a bang. It sets the stage by showing you what happened in the mine when it collapsed. After those scenes, it has a slow, tense build-up. During his conversation with Winters, Nathan reveals the horrifying facts of this particular case. At this point, the episode cuts to flashbacks where it shows the events leading up to the collapse in the mine. After that, the story takes place almost entirely on the morgue while Dr. Winters performs the autopsies. The story is intriguing, there's a constant ominous vibe permeating every beat. The atmosphere is menacing, thick with dread. Tension is sustained as much as possible. The episode exudes a sense that something's off, things are far from over, even when it's just a conversation between two old friends. The camera movements are interesting too. One visual element I found compelling was the different shots of the spider, foreshadowing the predatory nature of the story's antagonist. At first, it seems like the episode is going to be a thriller, but it slowly changes into sci-fi horror. The director put a lot of effort in the visual presentation. You can see a lot of creative shots. When it comes to performances, they were excellent. Special praise goes to F. Murray Abraham. Keep in mind that he's an Academy Award winner. You can tell this actor is in the zone. Dr. Winters' demeanor is arresting. He carries himself with ease, even though he's gravely ill. He displays the professional calmness of someone who has put more than his 10,000 hours in his trade. When he has his encounter with the unspeakable, you see him react with a mix of fear and perplexity. This emotional state soon turns into rage against such an awful enemy. The actor sold the horror of the situation perfectly. Every scene feels important. As the villainous counterpart, Luke Roberts is also great. He delivers a chilling performance as the Traveler. The material given to him is grotesque, but at the same time it has a mesmerizing quality. He makes the most of it with this interpretation of the sadistic intelligent alien. The most important question to ask is this one. If you regard this adaptation divorced from the source material, can it hold its own as a good piece of horror? I gotta say the answer is yes. The Autopsy delivers a well-crafted, self-contained nightmare for your entertainment. Check it out if you haven't. And of course, if you haven't read the original story, please do it. It's a masterful horror tale. With that being said, I want to talk in detail about the biggest problem with this adaptation. As I said before, I think this is a good horror episode, but there is one key detail that bothered me a lot. This particular problem, I would describe it as this.
Like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad.
Regarding adaptations, one argument you will hear dozens of times is that a particular book is better than its movie counterpart. It's gotten to the point where people consider their argument a cliché in itself, a thing that only the pretentious types like to say. That's not what I'm talking about. The case of the Autopsy is complicated because this version is faithful to the original short story. The visual presentation is terrific, it goes the extra mile in some areas, but the source material has one critical scene that is missing from the Netflix adaptation. My point is this. They removed a crucial moment of the story, which lessened the impact of the ending. They took out the moment that delivers the final masterful touch to the horrific journey. To explain the exact nature of what they removed, I have to dig deep into the final confrontation, the ending of the story, so that's your warning. Throughout the whole episode, right down to the big reveal, the story is teasing the audience with all the strange facts about the case. the strange behavior from the suspect. It makes you wonder what exactly he is. Unfortunately, the adaptation makes it more obvious that in fact the authorities are dealing with an alien, but it still leaves enough room for speculation as to the mechanics of the alien, how exactly it operates. The big twist is that this thing is still alive inside the body of Joe Allen. It operates by taking over a host in order to control it completely. It makes the host commit atrocities to satiate its ceaseless hunger. That's where the cannibalistic serial killer aspect of the narrative fits in. The person is fully conscious inside while the alien performs the most infernal acts. This concept is similar to the sunken place from the movie Get Out. While the demon is out there rampaging using the person's body as its vehicle, the host is trapped inside, watching everything, feeling it all from the sunken place. All of this is explained by the monster, who calls himself a traveler. He caused the collapse in the mind deliberately to escape capture. Once in the morgue, he paralyzes Dr. Winters as part of his plan. While he has the upper hand, the Traveler delivers a terrifying villain monologue explaining all the horrible things he has done in the past, as well as all the horrible things he plans to do once he takes over the Doctor's body.
Your friend the sheriff will come soon.
Son of...
I believe. He will make a fine first meal for us.
His flesh will nurture our body, and your anguish as we consume him will nurture my soul, to say nothing at all of his.
The psychological terror he inflicts on the Doctor is part of his feast. This is the stage for the final battle, if you can call it that. In this sequence, the hyper-intelligent parasite performs an autopsy on his host while terrorizing poor Dr. Winters with his evil monologue. The Traveler wants to transfer his real body into Winters' body.
You're going to transfer yourself from Alan into me?
Correct.
This is without a doubt the most important moment of the whole story. All the elements are in place. The villain, the hero, which in this case is more of a tragic protagonist. Everything is at peak terror. In both versions, Winters inquires about the man the monster is currently controlling, Joe Allen, whose real name is Eddie Sykes. This is the part where they removed the crucial exchange. Let's go with the Netflix version first.
And Eddie Sykes?
Oh yes, he is here with us right now, mute and powerless, as I disembowel him.
A few moments later, the parasite finishes transferring itself. Dr. Winters implies that before the alien got disconnected from the dead man's body, Eddie gave him the scalpel so he could use it as a weapon against the monster.
Sykes knew you'd be blind and deaf. Once you were out of him, you sadistic bastard.
In both versions of the story, the protagonist realizes he has no way of escaping, so he uses the scalpel to destroy all his senses, sabotaging in the process the future home of the Traveler. That way, the parasite will die inside him, unable to do anything. Also in both versions, the Doctor writes a message to his friend Nate using his own blood. The key difference between the Netflix adaptation and the original short story resides in the dead man, Eddie Sykes, who's being controlled by the parasite. In the source material, this is the exchange they removed between Winters and the Traveler when he asks about the man. And Joe Allen? Oh yes, Doctor. He is with us now, has been throughout. I grieve to abandon so rare a host. He is a true hermit philosopher, well read in 4 languages. He is writing a translation of Marcus Aurelius. He was, I mean, in his free time. Just before the Traveler finishes transferring his body to the Doctor's, this happens. This, he knew, was his last moment. Before his own personal horror should begin and engulf him, he squarely met the corpse's eyes and said, "Goodbye, Joe Allen. Eddie Sykes, I mean. I hope he gave you strength, the golden Marcus. I love him too. You are guiltless. Peace be with you at the last." The demon's smile stayed fixed, but effortlessly, Winters looked through it to the real eyes, those of the encoffined man, tormented eyes foreseeing death and craving it. This is the scene where the dead man goes limp, just like in the adaptation, with the scalpel in his hand. With a blaze like a nova of light, Winters understood. The man Sykes had, for a microsecond before his end, repossessed himself, had flung a dying impulse of his own will down through his rotten, fading muscles and had managed a single independent gesture in the narrow interval between the demon's departure and his own death. He had clutched the scalpel and flung out his arm, locking the joints as life left him. It rekindled Winter's own will, lit a fire of rage and vengefulness. He had cut hope from his predecessor. This scene in the short story is simply amazing. Everything builds up to that point. Until then, Eddie Sykes was the lunatic who would live in infamy in everyone's eyes as a horrible monster, a serial killer, a deranged cannibal. In reality, he was just another victim of the real monster. This recognition on the part of Winters made him offer Eddie a gesture of compassion, kind words of absolution. Those words were enough to spark one last bold act of defiance from Eddie. That's why Winters gets the scalpel. Why on earth did they omit this dialogue sequence from the Netflix version? It is the most impactful and philosophical exchange of the story. That is, in my opinion, the biggest flaw of this adaptation. In the Netflix version, they included almost everything. The workers, the mine, the explosion, all the details. That shows real commitment to the story. On the other hand, the conversation they omitted was so easy to include in comparison. They just had to add a few lines of dialogue. It blows my mind, I don't understand it. As the story progresses, a lot of grisly elements keep piling up. Grotesque tales of murder, a deranged serial killer, the senseless workers' deaths. Then you get to see the disgusting autopsy section performed with clinical precision, first by Winters, but it gets more revolting later on when the cadaver performs a self-autopsy, all the while he torments Winters. Layer upon layer of nightmarish imagery. This is why the kind words that Winters says to Eddie are so liberating. He makes a connection with the trapped man, bringing up the Stoic sage Marcus Aurelius into the forefront. This scene, in a way, also provides some relief for the reader, as if saying, the nightmare will finally be over. But then, when all hope is lost, Eddie rebels and manages to give Winters the scalpel to fight the demon. The momentary relief given to the reader is replaced by excitement. It's not over, Parasite, the dog is armed and dangerous. It bothered me a lot when I got to this part of the episode, because this section is missing. There's no characterization for Eddie Sykes. He's a victim, of course, but you never get to know anything about him. He's just another worker and he drinks. That's about it. It would have given emotional depth to the scene, which in turn heightens the horror aspect. If you watched the episode but haven't read the story, perhaps you'll consider this criticism nitpicking, but I stand by it. The sequence was crucial. They shouldn't have removed it.